Welcome to the Strong Enough Podcast, your relationship wellness podcast. I'm your host, Claudia. Today's guest is going to share with us how she became addicted to alcohol and other substances as a teenager. She hit her rock bottom and realized it was time to change. And now she helps others on the road beyond recovery. Please help me in welcoming Tamar Medford. Tamar, it's so good to see you today. How are you?
I am doing wonderful. How are you? It's so great to be on your show.
Thank you so much. I am really excited about this one. I have to tell you, and we don't know where it's going to go. We just discussed that this could go anywhere, and I'm excited about that. But I know where we're going to start. Why don't you tell the audience a little bit about you?
Well, my name's Tamar Medford. I'm host of the Road Beyond Recovery podcast. I'm also a performance consultant, a Neuro Change Method practitioner, and my mission is to really help those in recovery lead more authentically fulfilled lives, discover their purpose, and create a life so good for themselves that they never want to go back. And of course, that has come because of my own journey through 22 years of addiction. And honestly, up until a couple of years ago, I never thought that it was possible to do something like this, right? To give back, because I always thought that my past would always follow me around in such a negative way. And I finally, I started hanging out with other entrepreneurs, other podcasters, and they're like, Tamar, you have a story that other people could relate to, right? Because I wasn't homeless. And so I slowly started to chip away at those limiting beliefs that held me back. And I think when it's done for me is given me such an amazing recovery that I really wanted to focus on beyond recovery, right? What comes next? Because I felt like I was settling, and you don't have to in life. And it's amazing the world that I've opened up. And now my passion and why I get excited to get up in the morning is to help other people do the same.
That is what I love about your podcast. First off, that it is the road beyond recovery. So I think so many people and groups and podcasts focus on to recovery. But then what? What are you supposed to do after that? Are you just supposed to know everything? You figured it all out, and now you just go on your merry way and you magically know what to do. So I love that you are actually focusing on that, what to do next. The other thing I want to say is I'm so glad that you did decide to use your story to help others, because what I have learned is that our mess is our message. So we all have a mess somewhere tucked back there, and we think, nobody else has that same thing. Ours might be different. It's not as bad as somebody else's, but we all have that message to share. I want to start with kind of where your message began, and I think that was when you were a teenager. So will you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. And I think it's important to note too that we all have different journeys, and a lot of people, there's a stigma around addiction, let's be honest, right? And I think that was what where the fear stemmed from for sharing my story for so long, that I didn't want to talk about it. But the reality was I had amazing upbringing. I had two wonderful parents, a great brother, good family life, but alcoholism and addiction ran in our family. And so at the age of 14, it's those high school years. It's where you really want to fit in, you want to be a part of. And I never felt like I really fit in, right? Because we moved around a lot before that time. And so I remember the first time I was, introduced to alcohol on a substantial level, because of course I'm European. I was born in Holland. And so, we start to drink at the age of 12. So alcohol was not taboo. It's definitely different, I think, in North American society. So my parents never held it from us, right? We weren't one of those kids that couldn't have a sip of my dad's beer or wine cooler or whatnot. And so as soon as we did it, we were off to the races. It was never like that for me. But when I first got drunk and I got that buzz, I fell in love. It was like liquid gold. It was like, this is my solution to everything. Because for the first time, I found a solution to not having to deal with my emotions, because I really, looking back now, I believe that I drank because of my inability to deal with my emotions. And I wanted to fit in. I wanted to be that cool person who made people laugh, because I wasn't comfortable. Like, I was a very uncomfortable teenager, right? And because I didn't have one specific crowd that I surrounded myself with. But that progressed to drugs because I wasn't afraid to put anything in my body. I'm like, hey, if that's going to make me feel as good as alcohol, then giddy up. Let's go, right? Including food, because I still love food today. I mean, I think my best times are going out with a friend or a group of friends and eating a good meal and sharing a good conversation. So
Same.
It's good times. But unfortunately, that progressed, right? And that desire to chase that feeling, because as you know, I mean, the first time I got drunk didn't take very long. And then I started drinking those, 2-liter wine cool. I've always been seen toting those around with me. And it was more and more and more and more. And I think that led into using heavier drugs, right? This disease progresses very, very quickly. So all of a sudden, before I had a, confidence problem, right? I was very insecure, and instead of dealing with those feelings, I decided to cover it up with substances. And then I had a blackout problem. And so to solve that problem, well, I might as well get into cocaine and other substances, right? And from there, it really quickly progressed. And I can honestly say that when it comes to addiction, there's probably not many things I haven't been addicted to in my life.
A lot of people feel like there is a trauma that is attached to their addiction. But from you talking, it sounds more like, and I'm not minimizing this, but it was that lack of fitting in and that lack of confidence. Do you tie that back to anything, or do you feel like that was the basis of what began your addiction?
I would say that's part of what started the ball rolling, because it really was my insecurities, right? My belief that I didn't fit in. And I'm actually working right now, because when I work with clients, part of what we work on is limiting beliefs, and the how our experiences really form our beliefs into adulthood. And, we all go through trauma, but I think a lot of people, when they hear trauma, they think really terrible things happening. But really, I've been taught recently that trauma is just that disconnect, right? And so my dad and I were really, really close when I was younger. And as he chased his dream, he started to travel a lot more. And it was right in those teenage years. And so I felt that disconnect from him. And I also... he always taught me, you could do better if you got I didn't usually get over a C+ in school, but if I got a C, I could get a C+, right? I always played sports. So great, you scored 1 goal, you should score two. And so I think for me, I never felt like anything was enough. And that's why I've also stemmed my perfectionism too, because for me, it's hard to put out something good. It has to be great, right? And it's great in my mind. I mean, what I think is good could be fantastic in somebody else's mind. But I think that's really where it stemmed from, is that desire for approval. And even though I was loved and I got it, it wasn't the type of approval I needed at the time. Like, I wanted my dad to say, give me this like literal little pat on the back and say, you're enough. Right. And he always said he loved me, but I was constantly needed more and more and more. And I would say that's kind of where it went from. And that's where my trauma was, is that when he also left, that started my fear of abandonment. So I took that into my relationship. So I think we all go through these little disconnects in our life, and then we can either let them define us, which I certainly did, or we can learn from them. So I think that's where mine came from. And just, it runs in my family, right? When we have any mind altering substance, we are all in.
Do you feel like your parents or your family maybe didn't get concerned enough because it runs in your family? So they saw you doing something and it wasn't that big of a deal to them because they were doing it too, essentially.
My parents were very fortunate. Addiction really did not hit them. Now, my mom, borderline, she loves her wine, so I'm not to judge because I get it, right? And she doesn't drink excessively, but that's really not what addiction is. And so I think, I've talked to my dad since, and he's very involved in my recovery life. We're doing a documentary together, but his own brother, is an alcoholic, and his kids had issues, and they always looked at it like, because as alcoholics or addicts, we're very good at hiding things. We're very good at manipulating. And so I don't think they really knew the degree to which I was. And just like, my dad was shocked when my uncle finally, started openly admitting that he was hiding bottles of vodka and all that kind of stuff. So I think there's this deception there, right? Because we're ashamed of what we're doing. We don't want to show the people we love. And so I think my parents did what they could with knowing what they did, right? And they'd never raised a child who had addiction issues.
I'd like to talk a little bit about how your relationship with your parents went after you became an addict, because as you said, now as an addict, you become manipulative, you hide things. So did that affect your relationship through those late teen years and your 20s?
Absolutely. I think when I started doing harder drugs, my dad and I really grew apart. And that was, my dad and I were very close. So when he left my mother at the age of, when I was 18, I really resented him for that, right? And I was also mad at my mother for letting it happen, even though now as an adult, I know that's not true. And so, what I did is I started just seeking out relationships that were incredibly destructive. I was codependent. And on one side, my mom was that savior, right? She's the enabler. She's codependent. And if I needed money or I needed help, I could always say, "Hey, Mom, I can't pay my rent." And I lied like crazy. She wanted to be needed. And so for her, that was amazing. She loved that. She lapped that up, which actually could, is part of the reason why I think a lot of people stay in addiction, is because their parents enable their behavior. And on my dad, on the other hand, as soon as he started to see my life fall apart like that, and he did not know until he read my book recently about the cocaine usage, but he definitely saw something going on, and he confided in friends, and they said, tough love, tough love. And so I started getting into abusive relationships, and they were watching this happen. My mom was always the one that helped me, and my dad was always the one that started to push me away, and that really hurt. And so then I thought, okay, well, I'm going to do what society tells me to do. I'm going to get married. I married an alcoholic, of course, because, why wouldn't you? Mm-hmm. And I can just see how my mom kind of, kept me in that, not on purpose. I never blame anybody for staying in like I did, but my dad was the one like, okay, I'm going to let her hit her bottom. And so it affected our relationship greatly, because it's interesting today, my dad and I are really close, but at the time I'm like, what an asshole. Like, how dare you say I'm irresponsible? I shouldn't have a car. I need to save my money. I drink too much. Right. And I was really angry and resentful towards that. And it wasn't until I came into recovery that I started to notice that. It also wasn't until I came into recovery that I noticed how enabling my mother's behavior was. Right. But I always was closer to her during my addiction. So
that's exactly what I was going to ask. If the way that your father handled things, which was the more right way, I guess, in terms of trying to get healthy, versus how your mom handled things, if that did push you two closer together, which would only feed her codependency and creates another cycle for you to stay in the addiction.
It did. And, when I think about it now, to how manipulative that was, my mom was very hurt when my dad left. And for her to see what I'm going through with my dad, and for me to fuel that fire, right? And be like, he came to me and how dare he? Well, of course my mom's going to be like, yeah, what a jerk, right? And it just perpetuates the situation even worse, to her enabling more. So I was the one who allowed her to enable me. And it's completely switched now, since I've recovered. But yeah, I manipulated the situation so badly.
How does that affect your relationship with your mom now, or just once you went into recovery?
So when I went into recovery, my mom, I think she knew a little bit more than my dad because I saw my mom a lot more than I saw my dad at that point. And she was very supportive in the beginning. She said, I figured you had a problem. I mean, even when I was with my ex-husband, we couldn't do anything without drinking, including going to my mother's house for, afternoon coffee or something like that. It was pretty bad. Or we'd always have to sleep over if we were going to have dinner, right? Because we knew we'd be too drunk to leave. But she supported me a lot in the beginning. And I think because that's her role, right? She loves to be there for me. She always has, and she's been wonderful that way. But I noticed the transition from, my dad slowly kind of going, okay, I'm liking this. Like, this is good. She's getting the help she needs. But then a little bit later on, because of my mother's codependency, she was wondering, well, why do you still have to do this stuff? Like, why do you still have to go to meetings? Why do you still have to meet these people and help other people? Like, you should be cured. And I honestly, in the beginning, when I came into recovery, thought, okay, well, I'm going to learn A, how to drink like other people, or B, how to graduate through this program and be able to live a wonderful, magical life. But we know that's not the way it works, right? So my mom and I have had to work hard at it. And it's been on me to create boundaries and say, listen, I don't want to go back there. And so it's been tough. Like, it's a challenge. It's something that we still work through. But my dad has completely accepted it and has embraced my journey and understands now because he's chosen to be a part of that as well.
Talk to me a little bit about your marriage and how that flowed with two alcoholics and an abusive relationship.
So the abusive relationship happened before that. I was in a 4-year relationship with an addict, and he actually earlier this year passed away because he lost his battle with addiction. And so it was a very codependent relationship. Of course, I was using, he was using. I always thought I was better than, because I thought, well, you're doing even harder drugs. So I'm the classy one here. And, when I finally gained the courage to leave that relationship, because the reality is that I enabled that behavior. I stayed in there for 4 years. I went into a depression for 2 months, and I basically sat inside my room and I drank and used cocaine for 2 months before I actually went into the real world, because being beaten by somebody who you thought loved you is very tough to deal with. And then I slowly started to go out. My husband, we worked together. And so we met, started hanging out, became very close. And of course, there's a joke amongst people in recovery that, what do alcoholics bring on their second date? A U-Haul. And, I'm very, I'm very all in kind of person, right? And so instantly fell in love. He drank like I did, but he said, you got to get off the harder drugs because I'm just not going to tolerate that. And so, we met a year and a half later, we got engaged. A year after that, we got married, but we couldn't do anything without alcohol. And, we would go to the movies and we'd have a little bottle of vodka with us. We always had to do activities that included alcohol. If there wasn't, he wouldn't do it, first of all, because I had friends, which I still have today, that are not alcoholics, that don't have issues with alcohol, right? But we would purposely start hanging out with other couples or other groups that, we migrated to those who were doing what we were doing. And during I think we were married for about 6 years, we became financially bankrupt. I mean, there was times we were $75,000 in credit card debt, and we'd be figuring out how to get a bottle of vodka to last through the week. And I'm like, well, we got some noodle soup in there. We have some craft dinner. I think we're going to be good. And we transfer balances from one card to another. And, I just remember at the end of that, we were so disconnected. I was 215 pounds because my depression had come back. I had been medicated for some period too. And I just remember sitting on the floor with a bottle of pills and just wanting to end my life. And I was sitting beside my dog. We had a little pug at the time. And, he just looked at me in this way that something, I call it divine intervention, came over me. And I finally had the desire to live. But that moment on, I decided I need to make changes. It wasn't to get sober right away, but I knew I had to do some pretty drastic things because everything was falling apart in my life. And it was, not too long after that the relationship actually ended. And it's because over a period of, deciding that because I was overweight, if I hired a personal trainer, I could heal by changing how I looked on the outside, I could heal on the inside. And I thought, then he's going to love me more. Other people are going to love me more. I'm going to be good. And what I didn't realize, though, is the personal trainer I hired was actually in recovery. And so we went through that other journey. But in that process, my relationship started to fall apart. And I remember one day, 3 months after I'd gotten sober, saying, could we go out, have dinner, and you not drink? And we had nothing to say to each other. Nothing. And when we got home, he goes, so was that worth it to you? Was that a fun evening? And I knew right there that things had to end, and he's a great guy. We remained friends for some time after, but I couldn't have that in my life anymore. But I tried to live that normal life that society tells us you should live. That didn't work.
There's a lot to unpack there, for sure. And I'm trying to figure out which direction to go. One of the things I do want to ask you is about perfection. And you mentioned how that has been, I'll say, an issue, because I think a lot of us like to think perfection is a good quality, but it's really not. So how were you able to reconcile being a perfectionist and yet having some issues in relationships and maybe not being able to control your addiction?
That's a great question. So, perfectionism to me means that I do everything and I do it perfectly, or I know that things are going to have this perfect outcome before I take that step. And the interesting part is I'm unpacking this right now as we speak. I just actually, before, we jumped on, did a session with my energy healer, and we were talking about how I always had one foot out the door in every relationship that I've ever had, in that fear of being hurt, in that fear of abandonment, which stemmed from the trauma I experienced when my dad left, even though I didn't realize it. And so I made up for it in other ways, right? Because I thought that if I could show people that I was good at everything, right, they would naturally say, good job, Tamar, like, way to go, you did good. But that created so much torment. Like, my head was just spinning sometimes because I'm like, no one said something. This must not be good enough, right? Or my spouse didn't say something to me. I must not be good enough. And so I always placed my value on what other people said, which made me push even more, right? Because of that addictive personality. And I think that really harmed my relationships because, I learned about today celebrating life and celebrating not only giving love, but also allowing yourself to receive it. And I have really had a hard time allowing myself to receive it. It's like when somebody gives you a compliment, you do something well, right? As a perfectionist, mm-hmm. Somebody gives you a compliment on it and you're like, oh, you know what? It wasn't that good. You downplay it. Mm-hmm. Right? So you can imagine the pull you feel internally with the energy, what you're experiencing, and then you start to get in your head and you start to tell stories. It's exactly what I did in my relationship. I'd do something good. I'd make a meal or something and I never got that compliment. And I was like, oh, I didn't do good enough. Right? And so I hope that answered your question, but mm-hmm. It's a real conflicting thing for me because I wasn't allowing that love in either.
How difficult was it, or is it still difficult, to make that switch in yourself from looking for outside validation to letting yourself know and feel that you're enough based on your inside and what you do for yourself?
That has been quite a journey. I remember when I started traveling for business, it's also around the time I started my first podcast. And I started being a lot more open and honest and vulnerable, which I had a hard time. I could always share things very surfacey, but never get deep into the, how does this make me feel kind of thing. And so as I started to do that, I started to become more honest. I started to become more open and share what was going on. And so I spent a lot of time alone in hotel rooms, and I really had a hard time before this period of my life doing it. But all of a sudden, I started to develop this purpose in life, right? I started to wonder, okay, what makes me excited? What would cause me to want to go to bed early at night so I could wake up first thing in the morning and just take on the day and love what I'm doing? So I started to give a good, honest look to that, because I think oftentimes, like I did, you get stuck in this cycle of you're trying so hard to please everybody else, whether it's your boss, whether it's your partner, whether it's your kids. You do nothing for yourself. And that's what I was doing. And so when I found my purpose and I thought I could help others by sharing my journey of my health, of my recovery, right, my sobriety, all this kind of stuff. And so I started to do that. And from there, I started to look at, okay, my life's not perfect. I'm going to make all these mistakes. My weight is like a roller coaster kind of thing, but I'm okay to share that now. And I think just having that purpose in life gives you that internal motivation. And it allowed me to create a routine for myself that allowed me to love myself again, because I remember being away sometimes for weeks at a time. And whereas before I'd be anxious, I'd call my partner. I'd be like, "Hey, I'm in my head right now. I feel alone." And I stopped doing that. I started setting boundaries, like 7 p.m. My phone is going off. I'm going to read or watch Netflix or do what I love to do. And what I noticed happened is when I finally started to do what things filled my cup up, I was able to show up differently in the lives of the people I loved. And that was the first bit of transition, was accepting myself as not perfect, being able to accept that love, but self-love. That was the first piece of it. Now what I'm doing in my journey as we speak is I have that self-love, but I have to accept the love from other people, no matter what it is.
Will you talk a little bit about the continued process of being able to accept that self-love? Is it still difficult for you sometimes? Is it still a journey?
Absolutely, because I was and still am in some aspects a people pleaser, right? Because especially in what I do today, I mean, I love when I work with someone, I love seeing the light go on in their eyes when they realize they're capable of more than they think. And so I'm so used to giving all the time, but I recently went through something with my spouse, and we had a very short breakup, and it was communication issues, but the fracturing of that relationship actually brought us closer together, which caused me to look at, okay, I have both feet into my business. When I quit my corporate job, I knew that I couldn't half-ass things, but I'm doing it in every other aspect of my life, having one foot out the door, because I'm protecting myself from being hurt. But in reality, I'm just making myself miserable, right? And so during the fracture of that relationship, which actually only happened a couple months ago, we both realized, like, what are we doing here? And he realized that, I was the best thing that had happened to him. And I realized I didn't have both feet in, and I didn't allow that relationship to really bond like it could have. And what it's done is actually brought us closer together. And it's also showed me, the friends I have in my life. I've had these pillars of friends since I've been a teenager that have traveled my journey through addiction into recovery. They've supported every part of it. And they're opening up about their experience now, what's going on with them, which just kind of allows this love to grow. And it's celebrating life. It's celebrating the good, the bad, the ugly. And it's allowing me to have both feet into my relationship for the first time, I would say, ever in a romantic relationship. And that feels different for me. But you feel the energy in it, right? When somebody shows you love and they're sincere about it, and you actually work on each other's love languages, you learn to communicate better, you feel that. Like it's just something you get to experience then, instead of something you're always pushing that experience away from you.
How difficult was it for you to put both feet in for the first time?
It was hard. I had to go and see a therapist, right? And it's like, you always have people around you that say, be cautious, just be careful, just do a little bit. But I think that's always harmed me in a way because I'm not allowing myself to experience it fully, like, so what if it doesn't work out? At least I know if I've gone both feet in, I've given it 100% and I haven't been in 50% and then pulled my foot out when thing gets too hard, right? And so I think it's being mindful of what other people around you are sharing about it because it's our journey is our experience. And so it's been like, okay, no, I think once you identify that you're doing something, like for me, having one foot out the door, now you can start noticing when you're doing it and change your behavior immediately, right? And I think that's the powerful thing about doing that self-analysis and what are your beliefs that cause you to take certain actions?
How scary is that self-analysis? Because I think that's why a lot of people avoid moving forward or getting help because they're afraid of what they may learn or have to realize about themselves.
It's scary. And I think the first time I experienced that to the biggest degree was when I went into recovery, right? Part of the process was first recognizing that I had a problem because I was fairly high functioning. I mean, other than being severely overweight, depressed, bankrupt, all that kind of stuff, my marriage falling apart, on the outside, it would have seemed that I had it together, right? But when I came in, I would compare myself and I was like, well, I'm not like you. I wasn't homeless. I wasn't like you. I didn't go to jail. And it was that comparison. Like we do this to like, okay, how bad are they? Oh, I must not be an alcoholic then, right? So the first thing was admitting that, yeah, you have a problem, Tamar. And when I actually wrote up my life story, I'm like, whoa, that's pretty bad, right? And then learning that I could depend on other people for support, that was hard for me because I think as an adult, I was like, I should be able to do this by myself now. Like, come on, Tamar, you're a grown woman. You're 36 years old when I got sober. Suck it up. Like, what are you doing with your life? So accepting help, looking for other people who had what I wanted and learning from them. And then, it was a matter of really looking at the things the areas I went wrong, right? The people that I resented for so long, like my dad was at the top of the list that first time and I was so angry for the way he treated me. But when I started to dissect every issue I had ever had in my life, it all stemmed back to it was my fault. I created that life. I made the choices I did along that journey. And I can tell you one thing, that there was many opportunities where I was presented with an A or a B, and I picked B instead of A, right? I can see it now that I was actually being looked out for this whole time that I was in addiction. But when you really look at, typically, even if my spouse and I get into an argument, it's always my expectation of how I want him to respond. Mm-hmm. If friends, if acquaintances, it's how we would like other people to behave, and we only have control over ourselves. So that was the biggest realization, is my life is a result of all the choices I made. It's a consequence of my choice. So that consequence could be good and it can be bad. And I've allowed myself to stay open, to continue to learn that every time an opportunity comes or a mistake. Now I have the tools to be able to say, okay, what do I do? A or B, right? What aligns with that purpose? So yeah, it's every once in a while you get stumped, you get stuck in your head, you start telling yourselves those stories. And when I notice that I'm doing that for too long, it's time to look at, okay, what needs are not being met, or what am I expecting of others, basically.
But it's really accepting and taking ownership of your own feelings and then working to address them.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see it with people who have parents that are in addiction, right? And the kids, some of them make that choice to follow in their parents' footsteps. Others don't. They go, hey, you know what? I don't want to be like my mom is, so I'm not going to drink. And I see it happen all the time today, right? I mean, a lot of people will say, well, my parents were alcoholics, so I'm an alcoholic, right? And I think that's just something, once you try it, through different circumstances and different journeys. But yeah, I think we put a lot of blame on other people for the way our lives have turned out. And at a certain point, we do have a choice. So it's making those choices.
Do you feel like that's a cop-out when somebody says that, well, my parents were alcoholics, so now I'm an alcoholic, just accepting that? Or is that just part of addiction and being in that mindset?
I think it can be part of addiction because I think a lot of people turn to drugs and alcohol, like I said, for their inability to handle their emotions. And I think a lot of people go through, and the people that I interview on my show too, have gone through a lot of trauma, right? So for them, they want to mask that pain, right? They don't want to feel their emotions. And so they turn to other substances. And some people, it can even be food, right? I mean, food is it's a substance I turn to today. But I think that, and then other people's like myself, I had an amazing upbringing, right? I drank because, again, the same thing. It allowed me to not deal with my emotions. And so I think it's different for everybody. And I think though, as teenagers, it's harder for us to make that choice. And what I hear now from people who have teens in addiction or have teens that they're worried about, it could go back to what are we teaching kids in school, right? Because I can tell you there's a lot of things that I wish I had learned back then, right? But I think it's just different for everybody, and you can't pinpoint it to any one thing.
I know you've talked about food a little bit. I also love food. I just want to get that out there. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But what I want to talk about is kind of the roller coaster that you have been on and how you went from unhealthy ways to try to lose weight into a healthier way. We don't have to name names of programs, even though I'm sure people will be able to figure it out. But I know that there was a particular program that you used that you were able to manipulate. And so here is purported a healthy way to lose weight, but you were able to manipulate it so that you could drink a lot on the program and still stay within the program and lose weight. So will you talk a little bit about the evolution of your weight loss journey?
Absolutely. When I was a teenager, I was very athletic until I started drinking, because that was the time when I started to give up opportunities, right? That my life would have been different, although I don't want it to be different. But, the more I drank, I think, on a average weekend, I was drinking 5,000 calories of alcohol. So who knows what that equates to with the weekend total as well. And I remember I started gaining weight. I think I had gained about 40 pounds. This was in my mid-20s, and I just got sick of it because I'm like, man, I'm not used to my clothes feeling so tight. And I started to feel even more insecure. And I was a pretty insecure person at the time. So I joined one of those programs, and I had to, of course, keep track of what I ate and what points it were. And, the great thing for me as somebody who manipulates is that if I worked out or exercised, I could get extra points. So in the first month I started off, I'm by the book, all in, which is part of why I typically will go all out eventually. It wasn't happening fast enough, right? And I needed everything to happen very quickly because I didn't want to continue to do what I was doing to stay consistent. And so I decided, okay, well, I gotta step this up a notch. Like, I'm not losing weight quick enough. And so I went back and I started looking at all the different foods that were less points. And, this is a wonderful program, by the way, but unfortunately, when you're like someone like me, and I think we can all manipulate it, right? And then say the program doesn't work. It's not the program, it's us that doesn't work. So I'll admit that right away. So I thought, well, perfect. I can have a bag of popcorn, microwave popcorn in the morning, a bag of popcorn at lunch. That's 2 meals covered with 2 Diet Cokes. That's 2 points. Then I can go home. I can have a veggie patty and 7 oven-baked fries, and I would literally count them. If I wanted to sacrifice 1 beer, I would just have a little bit of mayo because I'm Dutch and we love mayo with our fries, not ketchup. I think that's gross. Now, if you mix ketchup and mayo, that's another thing, but that's my whole food side.
That's pretty amazing.
Exactly. And so then I would go for an hour walk. And what that would allow me to do is drink anywhere from 8 to 18 beers per night. And it depended if I wanted to go, do I want my buzz quicker? I'll drink the full beers, which are 3 points. Or do I want to drink more beers because I have a longer night, which is the light beer? I'll get 2 points. And I could do that I did that every single day. And there was times, and I took ephedrine-based diet pills, which also does not help. I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I was sweating profusely every single day at work. And I didn't feel good. Like I could have died from this experience. So definitely don't do this. But I finally remember weighing in, hitting my goal weight, being ecstatic, right? Because I'm like, I did it. And, it was so manipulative because now anytime, if I were to go back on that program now, I mean, I've grown up a little bit, but it's going to take me back into that diet mentality, right? And so for me, what that caused, I gained the weight back right away, of course. And that just started my evil journey of weight loss addiction. But, I've literally had to get rid of my scale today. I've had to get rid of all my tracking apps, and I've started intuitively eating because I have a very unhealthy relationship with food, and it's getting better now. But it's caused me to have to put on a little bit of weight because, of course, I go all in. Every time I go on a diet, it's like, how am I going to do it the fastest? Okay, I'm going to go low carbs, right? And then, of course, as soon as we start eating again, it's like, oh, why did I do this? And you can't stop. And the longer you do it, the more unhealthy it gets. And so this has been a challenge for me. Like I started intuitively eating about, I think last time we talked, like it was 3 months ago. And I literally had this feeling of I want to eat everything that I've been depriving myself of since the age of 18. Right. And now I'm not doing that because my body's like, whoa, Tamar, stop. Let's start eating some healthy stuff. So I'm starting to really take care of myself again. But yeah, it's always been right. It's anytime I was like unhealthy, I would think, oh, people won't love me as much. Right. And it always came back to that insecurity.
I do want to say the manipulation of the Mystery Points program, I totally relate to, as we discussed, because I would do the same thing, but with McFlurries. Wow. So I not anymore because they don't have the Reese's ones anymore. But when they had the Reese's McFlurry, that was my jam. But I would do the exact same thing as you, where I would eat, a leaf of lettuce in the morning and coffee and be able to eat like a large McFlurry, which was like 27 points or something. It was insane. And it's also insane that I remember that. But so I get it. Talk a little bit about the intuitive eating and how that feels in contrast.
It's tough. I remember when I first did it, it was freedom. So when I first started doing this, I'm like, it was actually my old personal trainer who would recommend. She started doing it with her clients because she's gone through her own health journey as well. And she said, I don't make them do food journals anymore because we obsess about these kind of things. And so the first time I walked into a grocery store, I actually got an audio book. I love to read books. And I started learning how to meditate on food and not look at it as good or bad, which was tough because, almost anybody that's gone on a weight loss journey can say, oh, I can't eat that because it's bad. And you beat yourself up because you associate the word bad with food. And food is not good or bad. It's food. It's processed or it's not. So I walked into the grocery store and I could buy whatever I wanted. It was the first time since I was 18 that I've gone grocery shopping and looked around and thought, oh, I've never tried that before. That would be good. I'll buy it next time, because I had to switch my mentality to one that I can have what I want every day if I wanted to, right? But that's not going to make me feel good. But having that awareness changed the way that I looked at things. And so I would walk down the chips aisle and I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm going to get myself a bag of chips, knowing that I could have those chips anytime I wanted. Guess what? I actually had to throw the chips away because I didn't eat the whole bag. But when you're not doing things like intuitive eating, you buy that bag of chips and you think, okay, I'm going to eat the whole bag of chips because tomorrow I'm going to start off again. But guess what? The cravings are going to start because you have this in your body and you're going to crave more stuff like that. And so it was very empowering, and I bought whatever I wanted to, and I left the other things on the shelf. Like, there was things that I wanted to try that I'm like, you know what? I can try that down the road. There's still things that I haven't eaten yet because my body now through this process is actually craving healthy food again. And because I was not eating well. Like a friend said, hey, you want to go out for ice cream? Giddy up. Ice cream is one of my favorite food. Pizza is one of my favorite foods. But I don't deprive myself of that anymore. But the second step was I had to get rid of all my tracking apps. I had to get rid of my weight loss apps because I lived on tracking. And if I didn't track one day, I'm like, I've probably gained 10 pounds. Like, you know what? And then I would binge, right? They call it in intuitive eating, the Last Supper mentality is when you go out for dinner with a friend, you order what you want because you're going to order probably what you would call the worst thing for you because this is your treat night. You're going to order a dessert, even if you're stuffed. And then the next day you're going to do it again because you've completely fallen off the wagon, right? It's that Last Supper. It's like, well, tomorrow is my fresh start. But if you don't have that, you go for dinner. I've tried different things at these restaurants that I've gone and ordered the same thing every single time I go to this restaurant. I'm trying new things because I know that I can go back to my favorite anytime I want. It's actually made my favorite food taste even better because I'm not binging out on it anymore. And so even though I'm learning how to, eat when I'm hungry and stop eating when I'm full, it's hard because I want to revert back to that scale. I felt my clothes getting a little bit tighter. They're getting looser again, which is good. So I'm on the downwheel. But it's really hard to get out of that mentality of having to track everything and nobody loves me any less because I have a little bit of a roll around my stomach. Like, who cares? There's more of me to love now. And that's been really difficult, especially with the fracture in my relationship. We were very focused on dieting and food. And he has finally said, you know what, babe, I love you no matter what you look like. And he has really helped in this process by supporting me in it. So it's always good to have support, but it is hard to let go of that old mentality. And I just cannot, there's days I still want to, maybe I should get a scale, maybe I should just see, and I can't do it. And there's a freedom around it, but it takes a lot of work.
Yeah, because when you said I got rid of my scale and all my tracking apps, I felt myself getting a little anxious there, just thinking about that. Even though I don't weigh myself every day, but it's there, just in case.
Yeah.
How do you think it would have felt had your spouse not said, I love you no matter what, a few pounds more, a few pounds less, it doesn't matter to me? Do you feel like you have that internal strength now to have said, I don't really care, like I'm still proceeding forward ahead with this path because it's right for me?
Well, it's interesting because before our breakup, that was very much how it was focused. He was focused on losing weight because he had gained weight. He would always, anytime I'd eat something, because I did keto for a long time, right? So it was always focused on carbs. And he'd be like, babe, that's a carb. Are you sure you want to eat that? And it got me so worked up because I never asked him to hold me accountable, right? I had my own accountability, which was myself and the people that I was, doing these challenges with. And so I would get so frustrated at him. And he was thinking he's just trying to help me and to motivate me, exactly like my dad did when I was little. Like, you can do better, and stuff like that, like really pushing me. But sometimes I just needed a pat on the back, like saying, hey, you know what? I see that you're making this effort. Good job, right? And we didn't have that. So I think the fear for him of losing me, because I literally moved out and, we live in two separate places because of what he wants to do for a career and what my career is, and it's working out fabulously. I think just that fear in him that he could lose someone that was super important to him allowed him to shift perspectives too, right? So I think had that not happened, things would probably be where they were before. And so for him, it's like, hey, you know what? I love this woman no matter what, because nothing inside changes. Like, she's still the woman that I love, regardless if she's in a small, medium, large, extra large size of clothes, right? It doesn't matter. And so what that's helped though, is it's helped me get through this journey of, we always kind of fall back in our limiting beliefs, in our negative self-talk that, oh, your shirt's too tight, you're too overweight, this isn't working for you, his support helps lift me up in those times, because I think we need that, right? We need somebody to reach out once in a while and say, by the way, I care about you. I'm there for you. Let me know how I can support you. And that's what he's doing. So having that support helps me. And I think that, when somebody can give you that energy until you have that energy yourself, that's what's making a huge difference right now, because he's just complementing what I'm doing.
I want to ask a few questions about some advice, because I feel like you are a wealth of experience and knowledge. I want to start with addiction. My understanding is that somebody can't truly be helped until they are ready to accept the help and do the work themselves. So what advice would you give to family, friends, spouses of somebody who is in addiction? What are the things that they can do to help the addict, but also to not drown themselves in misery because they can't fix the person?
That is a great question. And like you said, my personal experience is that I had to hit my bottom and realize I had to change before I wanted to. And from other people that I've spoken to, and I think it's different for everybody, some people get, incarcerated, institutionalized, right? They have their own awakening or their own moment when they realize they have to change. But I think a lot of times, like my mom did, right? Parents can enable their children. They can give them money. If they're struggling, they'll let them come back home. Their child steals from them, and they push them back out. Then they start to trust. Like it's a very frustrating thing to watch an addict go in and out, because we always have good intentions, right? When we say we want to get better, when we say we're tired of doing this, we mean it most of the time. But as soon as we ingest that substance, everything flies out the window. Nothing matters. Like I remember having some of my closest friends that are still my closest friends bailing out on them after having commitments because I was already drunk and I wanted to go do something else with other people who were just like me, right? And I never intended to hurt those people, because in fact, they meant the most to me, but I didn't want to show them who I really was. And so I think that, you see it in recovery centers right now, in treatment centers, it's not working because a lot of these people are forced into them, right? They get these interventions, they're put into treatment. Well, what do you think happens the moment they get out, right? Their mind isn't like, okay, now I have to do everything that I can to maintain this. They go back into their old life thinking, okay, well, now I'm not supposed to take a drink or drug. But they feel left out, right? They haven't been given those skills to really go, okay, if I use, this is what's going to happen, right? It just seems like a good idea. And that's why so many people relapse right after they come out of treatment, right? Because they haven't hit that point in their life where they're so desperate to change. And I'm super appreciative that I was a very high bottom drunk, right? And I say that because on the outside, it looked like I had my life together. I was never homeless, in prison, or anything like that. But that could also be part of the reason why I never asked for help in the first place. So people who are struggling, right, in my personal opinion, when you have a problem, you're always thinking about that. So like, for example, if you're drinking too much wine, right? And you can't go out without wanting to have a glass of wine. You can't do any function without thinking about drinking about wine. Chances are you might have a problem. And also, if you have to justify having it, chances are you have a problem. And it's interesting because alcohol, really, if you look at it, alcohol is the only drug, because that's what it is the only drug that you have to justify not having, right? So someone told me that and I was like, wow, it's so true, because it's so acceptable in our society, right? You could sit there and watch somebody eat 5 plates of food and it probably wouldn't faze you. I mean, 5 might, but say, 2 or 3 plates of food and they're eating. But you could see somebody get loaded and you'd be like, oh, wow, what an irresponsible adult, right? But so I think, for those that are trying to support their loved ones, it's important to let them know you're there. But sometimes you have to get to that point where, like my dad did, where he's like the tough love. He let me hit my bottom. He was always there. He always told me he loved me, but he wouldn't enable my behavior. So I think when you start to enable that behavior, that's where you get into trouble. You have to love from a distance, right? You can suggest maybe you should go to treatment. Can we help you in that aspect? But you can't do it for them. And for people that want to get help, if your life becomes out of control and every time you drink, you can't control it, then maybe it's time to reach out to somebody, because it's okay to not be okay. And you might not even have a problem. You might have something that you're trying to cover up, some emotions you're not allowing yourself to work through, right? But ask for help, because there's so many people that can relate.
Talk to me about wellness advice. I know you said that you realized how important it was to set boundaries, and even the boundaries of, this is at what time my phone goes on do not disturb, and then I can read or Netflix or whatever I'm going to do. Give me a little bit of wellness advice that you would pass out to the masses.
So if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of other people. And you can see, people who are tired, they're trying to get through the day, taking their children from point A to point B. And it wasn't until I finally set a routine. A morning routine was really, really important for me. And I learned that in early recovery. But for me, prayer and meditation are big when I wake up in the morning. Reading, getting some new information into my brain. It gets me thinking. It keeps me curious, right? And it actually helps with brain health. Not only learning to speak, but also learning to listen. And to, I will usually, sometimes throughout the day, I face a problem and I'm like, what do I do here? Like, I have no idea. I'm kind of stuck. I could really use some advice, universe. Like, what is going on here? And inevitably, usually sometime throughout the day, somebody says something to me where I'm like, oh, wow, that's exactly what I'm going through right now. Thank you for sharing your experience. So I think part of my wellness is saying what I want, asking for it, and then taking the time to listen, because it comes to you in different ways. Staying grounded is something that's really important to me, because if I've been known to take on too much, and I can get very close to the point of burnout. If I don't take the time to step away and just be silent or meditate, or I'll go outside sometimes with my bare feet and put my feet on the grass and just feel around me. And it sounds corny, but when you actually take the time to listen to what's going on around you, how the surfaces feel, you actually feel really calm, right? Deep breathing is known to actually alter our brain, right? It's a scientific fact. And most recently, what I've been doing for wellness is that when you discover your purpose, which is something I'm incredibly passionate about helping people discover, and you understand your values, when you start to set goals, if those two areas are aligned, you start to achieve your goals. You get this internal motivation. So I think it's important to find what internally motivates you. For me, it's my business and helping other people create a life so good for themselves they don't want to go back. That is what gets me up every day. So when I needed to set new health goals, I looked at it and thought, okay, what kind of health goals would help me not only achieve my goals in the way I feel. If I start to work out every morning before I start my business, guess what? I have more energy, I have more clarity, I have more focus. I feel good about myself because I can go to bed early and Netflix it up, and read and stuff, what I love to do in the evening. But when I aligned my goal of getting healthy with my values of being honest and open, and that related to my business, now I'm internally motivated to achieve that goal. And then I think at night, shutting your electronics off, because we sit on our phone too long. I actually have my phone goes on D&D every night at 7. Nobody can reach me unless they call twice. So, but there's only certain people who will ever do that. They know my schedule, right? And sharing that schedule, like, hey, I'm not available at this time, and reading, and just oftentimes I'll read a good romance. Like I never was a romance reader, or I'll read a good memoir or biography, something that doesn't make your brain think, something that actually calms you down, that you can get fully immersed into. And so when you go to sleep, it's just much easier to fall asleep. And I meditate before I go to bed. So I think creating that routine that works for you, that just gives you that mindfulness, because it helps your brain and it helps you grow, really.
I think it is so important for people to be willing to try different things.
Yeah.
They do one thing and say, well, that didn't work. I guess I'm just not meant to have wellness in my life or mindfulness. So thank you for talking about a lot of different things and being open to trying new things. Mm-hmm. What would you say is your biggest piece of relationship advice?
Well, if you haven't read the 5 love languages, I highly, highly recommend doing that. I think I have been with my partner now for 7 years, and the biggest issue we had was communication, right? I would over communicate, he would under communicate. I would get really frustrated. And I had read the love languages when I was married, but my husband didn't. And so I was like, okay, well, great. I know what my love language is. You're not feeding it. You won't read it. So I have no idea what your love language is. And we clashed, right? And so for me, it was realizing that I had to put both feet in. If I was in a relationship, a friendship, anything, I had to have both feet in, because if I gave it 100% and it still failed, at least at the end of the day, I know in my heart, I really tried, right? And don't get me wrong, I've been in many, many, many terrible relationships, but I always had that one foot out, right? To protect myself. And so truly being able to accept that love and be able to give that love by having both feet in, and also understanding what's important to your spouse, because my love language is quality time and words of affirmation, right? That came from my dad, and wanting that, hey, you know what? I love you. I care about you. So my partner has now understood that, and literally will leave his phone when we go out for dinner now. He leaves his phone at home, which is brand new. And I really need to learn by that example. So now when I'm with him, I feel so incredibly connected, because he is giving me 100% of his time, even if it's only an hour, and we don't spend a ton of time together, but I feel so connected. His love language is touch and quality time, right? So now, because he's giving me what I need, I will show that affection. I will put my hand on his leg when we're in public. I will grab his hand. I will give him a hug, and you can see the reciprocation. And I think, oftentimes we will do our love language is that what is our love language to our spouse. And then we get very mad, because I know a lot of women will be like, well, I cook and I clean and I do all this stuff and my husband doesn't appreciate it. But if his love language is touch, he's not getting touch. So he's getting resentful, right? Because you're doing acts of service. And so it's something to look at, right? It's like, are you showing up for your partner in the way that you would like somebody to show up? Like, would you like your partner to cook for you once in a while, or at least to, do some sort of an act or service for you? And that was a big eye opener too, right? Because oftentimes we show up the way we like other people to treat us. And so it's allowing that celebration of life, right? The give and take, the good, the bad, the ugly, and just loving it all.
It sounds like the old adage of treat others how you want to be treated. Yes, it's true, but with an asterisk, because we need to know how they want to be treated to feel loved and appreciated as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So we're gonna change things up here for a minute. We've talked about a lot of heavy things. Now we're gonna talk about tattoos.
Yes.
As you know, I love them, and both of us have on long sleeves today, so we can't really show off our tattoos, but I know that you also love tattoos. So I would love to hear about your favorite and or most meaningful tattoos that you have.
I love all my tattoos. I remember the first one I got was a little gecko on my ankle. I was 21 and I was so hungover, but I was so happy, right? I thought I was the coolest person alive. And I think my journey in getting these different tattoos has been all about my spiritual journey, right? And and I keep adding to that. And so I got a Om symbol on my right arm, which you can't see, and it was a Buddha in the middle of it because I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And so I thought, perfect, I'm going to tattoo that on my right arm. And it was small, and I just thought, how cool would it be to have like this kind of floral kind of, waves around it and stuff like that. So I got it added to, and it's my whole right arm now, the upper part of my right arm. And we were talking, I want to get something on my lower one. But when I look at it, it's very spiritual for me, right? It reminds me of this journey in recovery because I got it when I was in recovery, and it reminds me to be loving and kind to people. And I love looking at it, right? Every time I'm in an interview, if I don't have, if I don't have sleeves, somebody the other day was like, wow, I love your tattoos. And I think it's a neat way of stamping things on our body to say, this is who I am. This is what I love. So yeah, that's my favorite one.
I love that. I'm excited to hear what you're going to do on the lower arm. So I would appreciate if you would keep us posted. I know that the audience is probably typing in the chat right now, yes, we want to know. So you're going to have to come back once you get that done, if not before, so that we can see it. Tamar, where can people find you? I know you have an amazing podcast. I want you to talk a little bit about that. You wrote a book. Let's hear about that. And then if people feel connected to you and want to chat with you about your coaching and you're helping them be the best they can and find their passion.
Absolutely. So first of all, the easiest way to get a hold of me is my website, www.theroadforward.ca, so not .com. I'm Canadian, so we're a little quirky up here. So that has all my social media links. I think my favorite place to hang out is Instagram because there's a link there that can guide you to everything else. And I'm The Road Beyond Recovery on Instagram. And yeah, I wrote 2 books last year. I took full advantage of COVID and being inside all the time. My first book is called Hope Elevated, which shares my story of overcoming 22 years of addiction, what happened when I got into recovery. And then Beyond Recovery is my second book, where I really share my journey from getting sober, what that looked like, kind of the tools. And I talk about it in a way that's easy for anybody to implement. And so, if you have addiction issues or not, and then what it looked like becoming an entrepreneur, and you can find those both on Amazon. The podcast is the Road Beyond Recovery podcast. And in that podcast, I interview people who have overcome adversity and or addiction and who are basically shining in their recovery, because I think it's important to not get complacent in recovery, right? Oftentimes we feel like we have to settle for a life that we're really not truly happy with. And so I wanted to create the podcast to inspire anybody who's struggling with anything to realize they're capable of more, to realize they're not alone in this, because we are very connected. We're very tied together. And so that is kind of the goal of the podcast. And I love speaking to people. I offer 30-minute discovery calls to just talk about, what is your purpose? Maybe we can get you some clear direction. And also working with entrepreneurs, the neuroscience of things that I teach, and giving them business audits, and maybe just giving them some more clarity about where they can niche down and stuff. So, but the main part is my website for sure.
Excellent. Tamar, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. I'm so thankful that you were willing to share your story and give us all this great advice. Thank you so much today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was an honor to be on your show.
I really hope you guys enjoyed my conversation with Tamar as much as I did. I truly appreciate her willingness to open up about her relationship with her mom and dad and how those affected both her addiction and her recovery. It's so great to see how passionate she is now about helping others on their road beyond recovery. So remember, until next week, you are strong enough and you are worth it.
Thank you for listening to the Strong Enough podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platform by searching Strong Enough. And on YouTube, we're available on the Sphere Talk channel. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Strong Enough Pod. If you have suggestions for an upcoming episode or a future guest, please reach out at strongenoughpod@gmail.com. Remember, you are worth it.